All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm laughing because we know that there may be a whole bunch of people hanging out in the world of YouTube live stream. And we have a few folks joining us in the actual space live. But I want to welcome you to our panel for LGBTQ History Month as we're rounding out the end of the month. And I think, if I recall correctly, that this may be the last sort of workshopy event that we're having. I know there's a spooky event happening on next week on Monday. But I want to welcome you. My name is Carrie Arnold. I'm a full-time professor in behavioral health human services, and I'm also the director of our Collegiate Recovery Office. And I'm somebody that's going to both facilitate the discussion today, but also I am part of the discussion today because I am very out and queer on campus, and I don't hide anything about that. And I'm a person who is a person in recovery. And the topic today that I have to give full credit to our Mark David LGBTQ Center Director, Vinny Scarfo, because Vinny gave us the glorious title to this workshop, The Glass Closet. And so I've invited two very near and dear folks who I will have introduce themselves shortly, who I wanted to have this conversation with. We had also some additional people that, because of work schedules and everything, weren't able to join us. Oh, oopsie, we just had a little hiccup in the stream. But I invited folks who I know to join us so that we could have a dialogue, a conversation, because we represent different generations. We represent different aspects of queer identity, to talk about the navigation of queer nightlife and everything from coming out to our own identities, to our own grapples with substance use, and managing it all, trying to be clean and sober. So I'm gonna introduce. So I don't know how you appear on the live stream, but I'm going to introduce the person to my left, and this will be Katie Cohen. And Katie, I'm going to have you say a few things about who you are.
Great. Thank you, Carrie. I'm Katie Cohen. I identify as queer, I identify as sober, a person in recovery. How much am I introducing myself here?
As much as you'd like.
I am from Philly originally. So when I was coming out as a teenager in probably like 2003, 2004, the place to go was the Gayborhood. And that was also the time in my life that I was discovering drinking. So just to say that, because drinking and coming out, being under the influence of alcohol was so much a part of my queer identity, my lesbian identity at that time. And getting sober was not just a journey of getting sober. It was a journey of understanding how to be all of these identities at once. So looking forward to talking more about that today.
That's awesome. That's a nice little segue. And then to my right is Michael Galvin. And Michael, I'm going to have you introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Michael Galvan. I am also queer, sober. I am not a native Philadelphian. I actually grew up in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas, which posed its own interesting dilemmas and traumas for me, right? Growing up to a conservative Catholic family who, when I first came out of the closet, took them 9-10 years to accept that process, was really interesting, and kind of like Katie, found my well-being and acceptance in the gay community of Dallas, Texas, which was club heavy, nighttime oriented, a lot of drinking. And so again, like Katie, my identity was very intertwined with alcohol and coming out at the same time. So I'll leave it there.
That's fantastic. I feel like that's a nice You've both given everybody just a nice intro part to this, where I want to now start deepening the discussion a little bit, and I'll get us going by talking a little bit. I'm gonna bridge right off of how you both introduced yourselves and talk a little bit about. So I'm the old head in the group here, and I'm 61 years old, and I got sober in 1990. And one of the things to get us started, and some of the ways I thought about our conversation today, is to talk about what was happening in your worlds at the time period when you started to know about your own identity, what language you may have had for it, and when did substance use enter the picture. And so I'll do a jump off, and I'll tell a little piece of mine, and then I'm going to turn to both of you to talk about that. Um, when I was 6, in the 60s, I knew I liked I liked girls the way the boys liked the girls. But the 1960s, a very interesting time, right? We're coming into the world, entering the civil rights movement. I'm in elementary school, and then we've got the gay rights movements. And so the world is kind of busting open, but I did not grow up in Philadelphia. I grew up north of here in the Lehigh Valley in Bethlehem, a little town of, and it was not a friendly place at that time. And so I had no language, the language that exists today, and especially if anybody's joining us on the live stream who is a person that is under 30. You entered the world with a lot of language, and there's been a lot of trailblazing since then, but there wasn't a lot of language. And so we would first start hearing faggot and dyke. And that would be when I was in, probably in my mid-teens. And so I knew what those terms meant, and there was no way in hell I was going to be connected with those terms. And so I began my process of having a certain truth inside of me that I had deep shame about, that I knew was actually dangerous in the area that I lived in, and even where I would go to college, which would be in the middle of Pennsylvania, an equally unsafe place. And that would also coincide with my alcoholism and my substance use. And so for me, it was squelching and fermenting what I understood about the truth of me, because going to college, it was the early 80s, and we're now in Reagan era, and we're now entering when we start hearing about AIDS. And so as a group, as a community, we were very, very targeted at that time. And so my coming out would not happen until just 6 weeks before I got sober in 1990. And I'll talk more about like the nightlife scene and the pressures, but I wanted us all to have sort of a set the stage moment for how this process began. Well, this go around, I'm going to have you talk a little bit about this journey.
So the first time I told somebody I was gay was in 5th grade. I was born in 1990, right? As not to throw the age differential here, but the context here is that my parents grew up pre-children in the Reagan AIDS epidemic, right? And so as I was coming out, that was a big part of the conversation, right? Like my parents were like, "Oh, you're not going to be safe. You're not going to be healthy. You're not going to live." Da 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 da. Like that shadowed and clouded everything that they put me through. It was interesting for me because I took my first drink at 13, which is when I started really coming to terms with who I was as a young gay boy. And I think a lot of my drinking and sexuality were very intertwined from the early years of me being really confused and not knowing how to handle and be accepted and be loved for who I truly was. I didn't fully come out until college, where I was first identifying as bi, because I was like, oh, this is a smoother transition for people to handle, right? Like maybe they'll be more accepting if I'm bisexual, and then maybe in 6 weeks I'll tell them I'm gay, right? Or something like that. Some ridiculous timeline that I had in my head. But I think the world for me was like, I grew up in Texas. George Bush was governor. Rick Perry was governor. And then eventually Greg Abbott was governor, right? So like that was the background of my coming out story, was like there was a social movement behind the scenes of my coming out that didn't want me to be who I needed to be. And I remember my senior year of high school, I was forced out of the closet. My parents were spying and reading my MySpace messages to classmates of mine. And one of the things my dad told me in that year was, you tell me you want to be an elected official one day, or you want to work for government one day. No one's ever going to elect a gay person to be in public service. Neglected to tell me the fact that Harvey Milk had already broken that barrier years ago. But I think that the ultimate stepping point for me being able to come out and be true to who I was this is a longer narrative. We don't have to get into it right now, but there was a bad breakup in grad school. It happened. It was a thing. I spiraled straight into alcoholism from that, and basically rejected all of these norms that my parents had put on me. And like I said, I'm going to stop here in a second just to make sure that we get into more stuff. But like that era of I was 21, I had just turned 21, and it was such a distinct turning point in the shift for the conversation for me. So
that was awesome. That was really cool. Katie, how would you tell your journey up to this point?
Yeah, and thank you, Michael. You really brought a lot of memories to me and made me think about a lot of things that I haven't thought about in a while, which makes me want to give some context of my parents. I'm a first-generation American. My parents came here separately in the 80s and met in Philadelphia, where there was a large Russian Jewish community, and I was born in 1987, to parents and a family who just recently came here, with a lot of feelings of wanting to be free, and a lot of expectations of what they wanted for their kids. So then fast forward, I don't know, maybe when I was 14, 15. So 14 or 15 years later, I'm discovering that I'm not straight, and that I like alcohol. And I was discovering those things at the exact same time. And I remember kind of discovering, I was in high school in 2001. I started high school, and it was the first place that I saw, okay, there are other gay people. There's not a lot of them. They're here. There was a gay straight alliance in my high school at that time. Really grateful that people before me, paved that and put that there. And it was small. People made fun of it. We were called names. Our flyers were ripped up, all that stuff. So it was definitely very clear that this was a little safe haven that we had to protect. And I remember going to that gay straight alliance, and I became very involved. I became the president. And I was not somebody who was a good or involved student. So that just shows that, this was something that I felt really at home in, and that I was so glad for. And I went to that group and I told them, today when my mom picks me up, I'm going to come out. And I was terrified. And I did. I came out 15 or 16 years old. Very shortly after, I shaved my head and I started wearing my brother's clothes. And I did that because I wanted so much to be seen, and because I didn't have a space. I didn't have a place besides that GSA, that little group that met once a week, to tell people, hey, this is who I am. Are you like me too? And I started meeting some people like me, and they said, well, the place to go is the neighborhood. The place to go is to these clubs. And that was what it was. Like, if you were gay, you go be gay in clubs. You go meet other gay people dancing. And that meant alcohol and drugs for me at that time. And overlapping with that, to get a little deeper with the alcohol and drugs, it wasn't just like, to be gay, you have to do these things. It was, I'm suppressed. I'm depressed. I can't talk about who I am. I'm hiding. I'm disappointing my family. I'm constantly being asked, things that aren't aligned with who I am and how I feel inside. And substance took that away. I remember, and there was some alcoholism in my family, so I had been exposed to drinking alcohol and given alcohol, and kind of dabbled a bit as a very young person. But the first time with the other gay kids behind a strip mall in Northeast Philly, the Roosevelt Mall, an $11.25 bottle of Banker's Club vodka. We got a runner. He got us that. We went behind the mall. We drank it. I was on fire. It was like, I woke up and this girl that I liked, that I didn't know I was allowed to like, I had her number in my pocket when you had to write them down on paper. And people told me how funny I was, and I don't remember any of it. And all I knew was that I wanted to do it again. And so my drinking, my drinking got very intense very quickly. And I was a blackout drinker, and I got in trouble when I was drinking, and I did behavior that, was inappropriate and wasn't aligned with who I wanted to be and how I felt. But I truly didn't know how to, one, not feel depressed without alcohol, and two, I did not know how to be gay without alcohol. It was together. And I would sneak into Woody's. We'd take the L downtown. I'd sneak into Woody's. I'd sneak into Sisters. And that's what it was. So at 23, when I got sober, and everybody's story is different, but when you get sober at 23, there's a big issue to make you get sober at that age. And I knew I needed to. And I got sober. I was living in a different country. I came back here 2 months sober, back to Philadelphia, really excited and on fire to be sober. But like, wait, how do I be a gay person here? And I remember just being here maybe a week. So a couple months sober. I was going to AA meetings, and I had an AA sponsor, and I was like, oh, I'm going to go to this lesbian event that's happening downtown. I'm so excited. It's in a club. I've only ever been there drinking, and I can't wait to be there sober. And she's like, Katie, I don't think that's a good idea. That's probably not a good idea for you to put yourself in that atmosphere. And that was the first time where it was like, oh, do I have to give one up to be the other? How do I do this? So I imagine there'll be time to talk about that more later. Yeah.
So this is good. This is really good. I want to build off of what you both shared and sort of bring in two things that I feel are really relevant to this conversation. The idea of leading a double life, and what really hit me, Katie, was your statement about like, we can only be gay in clubs. And so I want to talk a little bit about this idea about leading a double life, but I also want to talk a little bit, and I'm going to share a piece of my story about internalized homophobia and the power of that, and how that, for me and for a lot of us, moved us towards alcohol and drugs. And so I was talking a little bit earlier about shame. And I didn't know the term internalized homophobia until much later in life. And it was finally a name I had for the thing that was there for me. So going to college is when my drinking took off, because I was finally away from my family. And I felt like that was at least a place where I could start feeling free, but I wasn't fully free, because here's this double life piece, that like in my mind, in my fantasies, and my imagination, I always had crushes on women in college, always. And my behavior did not match. And my behavior, because I was drinking very, very heavily, starting to use a lot of drugs, was being promiscuous with men. And what I would start to learn later was that this dissonance was centered around internalized homophobia, that I was taking on the position that the area I grew up in, the people I grew up in, the church I was raised in, the messages that were being fed to me constantly about people that were lesbian and gay at that time. It was a very binary world at that time. I use queer now and I love every bit of it. And that was also a derogatory term at that time period. But I just again come back to like taking in the poison of those messages and holding them for myself, and then even holding them against the people I definitely knew who I played sports with, because I got to school on a field hockey scholarship. I'd say 3/4 of our team were queer. I didn't even, and softball was one of my loves. I wouldn't go out for the softball team in college because they were all lesbians. They were all dykes. And so my internalized homophobia had me separating from the people I could have formed community with, but I would in turn talk about them negatively, because if I pointed the finger there, nobody was looking over here, and so when I would have my first girlfriend, it was 6 weeks before I got sober, but I was sneaking around. I lived here in Philly. I lived downtown at that time, and I would get really, really drunk in straight places, and then I would stumble into Woody's, and I would stumble into this. There was this total dive bar for women called Sneakers, and so I would stumble into Sneakers, and then we had another women's bar that was called Hepburn's at that time. This was pre-Sisters, and or I would go to the upstairs of Giovanni's room, the bookstore, and I would quickly like look at a book. I never made a purchase, but I could only do those things when I was really drunk and it was later in the evening and I didn't want anybody to see me. So there was the double life piece that was starting to come into play, and so I would have this girlfriend, again 6 weeks before I got sober, and we met when she was on a relapse, and so anything associated, I think about like the pressures of society about first loves across all lines, right? And here I was with a first love, the first person of a same sex that I desired to be with. And every encounter with this person, I was mostly in a drunk blackout. And so there was no recollection about that. There was, every once in a while I get some sad pangs around like that process for me, and entering that process of full freedom in the full truth of myself. But it was really tainted by my alcohol and drug use, which at that time, I couldn't stop. I didn't see a way out from that. So I'm gonna stop talking about that part of my story there. And Katie, I'm gonna shift back over to you in this moment to build off of some of this, either about secrecy, double life, internalized homophobia, and any of the roles that some of that played in sort of the this early part of your coming out process.
Yeah. Thank you. You brought up a very clear memory, though, of Giovanni's room. I would go to Giovanni's room a lot with a few friends, and I could never really afford anything. So I would always just browse and look. And then I remember finding this book on sale. It was lesbian erotica, and I bought it and I hid it. I was a teenager. I hid it in my room. And when nobody was home, I would read it. And just remembering that feeling of like excitement and eagerness mixed with like fear, shame, and sneakiness, which very much just feeling that and remembering that right now is really bringing me back very viscerally to how it felt at that time. And my internalized homophobia, when it comes to sobriety, I think came out in, I was extremely out as a person, as a gay person. And then when I got sober and I found a recovery community at that time through pretty much, white, straight, Northeast Philly AA, I went right back in the closet, in the sense of I didn't know how to make my queer identity part of my story. It just felt like the only relevant thing to talk about was my alcoholism and how I got sober and how I'm staying sober, and not necessarily that other stuff. But I was scared. I had my own internalized homophobia of how do I do this and how do I accept this in myself without substance, and also fear of what other people would think and if they would help me and how they would help me and all of these things. And there were not nearly as many as there are now, but there was a gay recovery community that I had access to, but I was terrified to exist with other people, with other gay people, without alcohol in my body, not knowing how to do that. And you talked about, Carrie, like sex and always being under the influence and being in blackouts. I mean, I had such minimal experience with not just sex, sober sex, but like sober, any kind of engaging in romance, flirting, expressing like for someone, any of that without alcohol in my body. And yeah, just wow, thinking about that and feeling that. Now, it took a long time in sobriety. I've been sober for 12 years, and I'd say the first 5 or 6 years were not, my queerness and my sobriety were not intermingled. They were very compartmentalized and very separate. And in the Alcoholics Anonymous, 12-step world that I got sober in, you would have a platform to kind of share your story of how you got sober. And I never included my being gay ever. Not understanding that I was, really withholding a part of myself. And now it's all integrated and it's all it's not compartmentalized, and it makes such a difference. And then I'm sure I'll talk a little bit later about the way I engaging in queer community now. Very different than the way that I used to, but yeah.
These are great topics, because this is bringing up a lot for me. I think with the double life and the internalized homophobia, like in high school when I started realizing I was gay, I prided myself. This is like a point of pride for me, which is so ridiculous, that all of my friends are homophobic, because I was like, they'll fix me, right? I used to pray and go to church religiously, pun intended there, but like I would pray that I would be cured of my homosexuality and all these things. And like, it obviously never happened, right? Because it doesn't happen. But I think when it comes to the double life, I really think about this era in college where I was living at home. I was working for Starbucks in our local mall. Um, and I was going to university about 30 minutes away. And so um, I was out at work, I was out at school, I was not out at home. Um, and one of my coworkers there, his name was Wesley, and God bless Wesley. He was like the godsend that I needed. Older gay man. He's about 10 years older than me. He was sent on a secret mission to uncover whether or not I was gay from my coworkers. So we were working a shift together, and he was just like, "That guy's kind of cute. What do you think?" And I was like, "Yeah, he's kind of cute too. Yeah, I agree." And Wesley was the one who introduced me to the gay Dallas nightlife scene, and like, I think the distinction between Wes and his friends and me is that he and his friends would drink a lot, but then they would be done, and I would go to the clubs and I would drink a lot and then keep going, right? And it got to a point where like I would only give myself like $40 in cash to bring to the bar, and then I would use it in a very wise way, I guess, to get incredibly hammered and then somehow sneak back out to my car, find my wallet, come back to the bar, and like empty my bank account for alcohol that night. And then I would drive the hour and a half back to my parents' house under the influence. How I never got a DUI or hurt anybody is beyond me. But the next day I would have to act completely sober, not hungover. Like, I didn't go out to the club. I wasn't out with my gay friends, right? Like, I was just at school studying is usually what I would say to my parents. And it's interesting to me now that I'm in a recovery space. I got sober when I was 28, and 27, turning 28 in 2018. And I didn't really know how to be friends with people outside of bars, kind of like what Katie was saying, right? Like, I just kind of existed in this bar space. And like, I remember still going to happy hours with friends early in sobriety, and my sponsor being like, that seems very unwise. You do what you want, but that doesn't seem smart. You know, by that time though, I was like an out proud individual in my identity. But I think the journey into that was just really interesting, right? Like, it involved a lot of binge drinking nights of like denial and opportunities that like I should have behaved better. And like, there was a conversation around sexuality, and like there was a point in time where internalized homophobia, I couldn't have sex with my partner unless I was under the influence of alcohol. And like, we had been together for like 5 years at that point. Like, I don't know what that was, but there was like a really intense period where I had to like be almost blackout drunk, and then we would be able to have sex. And so, yeah, I really like, I'm going to preview, like, now to me, it's like these queer spaces and these LGBTQ plus spaces and sobriety are so important to me. Like, we'll get into this a little bit more, but the ability for me to have a conversation with other queer people around like not just my sobriety and the recovery trauma, but like the family trauma and the religious trauma and all of these other things is huge in my day-to-day life now.
These are fantastic. Like, I'm just liking the way this is all unfolding, and we have some more folks joining us live, which we love that, and we will definitely make an opportunity for questions and comments. And Vinny, I don't know if there's anybody on the live stream that has posed anything. Oh, thanks for the hearts on the live stream, everybody. So this feels like a really nice place to move into this aspect, which you both sort of pointed towards, which is, I want us to think a little bit about both the kind of pressure, if you felt it, from as you started to enter into queer community around nightlife, around club scene, around alcohol and drugs, if that was still very present, but also having us start to talk about, because both of you alluded to this, starting to talk about the negotiations and the navigating of still getting to be active in our communities where use of substances might be still very prevalent, but now we're clean and sober at this point, right? And so I'll jump us off of here a little bit. Getting sober for me was, I just hit an absolute bottom. I was with the first girlfriend at that point in time. It was a Labor Day weekend in 1990. I was 28 years old. I woke up in piss and mud, and for whatever reason, was like, I have lost my dignity. I can't do this anymore. And so one of the beauties of, having my first girlfriend be a person that had formerly been sober and was on a relapse was she had sober friends. She had sober queer friends. And it would be one of those people who gave me her number that I would call to help me out. And I detoxed on my own. It was really dangerous. But this person was right there. And so that very first person that I made a call to would be the first person that showed me you could still go out in queer nightlife and not take a drink, and so like I like hung on a tiny bit with the then girlfriend who also got sober shortly after I did. And so there were, this one person and a couple of other people where, I had the associations, as I shared with you all earlier, about my associations with the gay nightlife was sneaking into them when I was already in a blackout from being out with all the straight people, and so now I'm like a deer in headlights, because I can share with all of you, I can vividly recall walking into the then women's bar Hepburn's and seeing all the people around the bar and watching the people doing shots and everything. And I had this interesting sort of juxtaposition because I didn't feel tempted to go join them to drink, but I did not know how to behave because, and we have a saying, a lot of us in recovery, that booze and drugs are social lubricants, and so all of a sudden I'm like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do because all my promiscuity, with men prior to that was, I don't even know how I picked people up because I was just out of my mind, drunk and high, and so I had to relearn how to be social, but I'm in the place where now my people are, but my people are drinking heavily. So like I'm watching all this, and the first two times I went with this person who helped me get sober, and this was a godsend. My first tool, the first thing I learned was get a seltzer, have them put lime in it, have a nice little straw in it, maybe have a fancy umbrella in it, because now you can look like you're fitting in, but nobody has to know what's in there. That might sound so simple, but that was a saving grace for me, and so like my first entry into that setting was 1990 did not have, to my knowledge at that time, at least nothing I could find, queer spaces that people were sober. in. There might have been the occasional reading at Giovanni's room, which I started going back to Giovanni's room without trying to sneak in there at nighttime because I was no longer drunk, but outside of that, the occasional poetry reading, again, I'm setting the stage here, the 90s, like we just didn't have a lot of these spaces yet. And so I was fumbling. It was a bit awkward. But I somehow started to assimilate, and that I could have my non-alcoholic beverage and I could start to be there and just start to sort of like blend in. But I can tell all of you that that time period in the world here in Philly was still very much a queer club life that was centered solely around drugs and alcohol. And you have to remember too, we're now entering club drug scene, so you've got lots of people that are doing all kinds of stuff that, thank God, I kind of stopped when I did, because I'm not sure if I'd be alive today, quite honestly. So I'm going to send it over to Michael now. And Michael, maybe you can talk a bit about, again, the navigation of, how you start blending into your queer community, and even like what early sober time felt like.
Yeah. So early into me being out with Wes and his friends, Dallas, Texas is interesting because like we here have Pride, we have Outfest, we kind of have a few different opportunities to engage in like queer community in public, and in a safe way. So it's really cool. Dallas, you kind of have to do everything a little bit more subdued. So there was an Easter concert in the park, I remember, when I was 20 years old. And I was like, oh, this will be great. Like it's a picnic, like there's a symphony, it'll be like classy. There's a lot of gay people that'll be there, so it'll be great. It was actually just an excuse to get drunk at a park. And I took advantage of that. And like it was an event that started at 9 a.m. and then you would go till 2, 3, 4 a.m. the next day. And this was like an annual thing, right? And so like my exposure to gay queer spaces was in the sense of that like everything has to involve alcohol all the time. And to kind of add to this story a little bit, when I first got sober, I didn't get sober because of a bottom. A lot of alcoholics have a pretty severe bottom that leads them into recovery spaces and things like that. I was mostly functioning pretty okay. Like I was on some, I have bipolar disorder, so I was on some pretty intense antipsychotics, and I was still binge drinking at the same time, which, like, if you know anything about the two, they don't mix well. And I had a therapy session with my husband, and my therapist was like, "You can't fucking drink on these things. Like, you have to stop drinking. You have to stop drinking." And I was like, I don't see the point. I don't understand why. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm just going to keep doing it. I'm fine. I'm in control. And then she posed this question to me. She pointed to my husband and she goes, "Would you quit drinking if it meant it would save your marriage?" And I couldn't answer the question. I paused for like 30 seconds, which was 30 seconds too long. Which then led her into a longer conversation of like, let's analyze your history of drinking and let's analyze your relationship with alcohol. And the therapy session concluded with her saying, you have to go to at least 3 AA meetings. I met my sponsor at my first AA meeting. I asked him immediately after the meeting to be my sponsor, because I knew if I didn't have somebody to hold me accountable right from the get-go, I wasn't coming back. And I remember very early on in our conversations, I think I was supposed to go to like a wedding or some event that was like dancing would have been involved and alcohol would have been involved. And I was talking to him about it. And I was like, I don't get it. I don't know how to function in this space. Like, if I'm dancing, I'm drinking. And if I'm drinking, it's going to lead to dancing, right? Like that's how I operate, social lubricant, right? And he was like, have you ever tried sober dancing? And I was like, no. And he was like, it's actually a lot more fun than you think. Like, give it a shot, enjoy it, relax, be present in the moment. You'll like actually realize that you're enjoying yourself if you just kind of go with it. And I thank God for that sponsor, because prior to that, all my relationships with men, specifically other gay men, had been based around either alcohol or sexual promiscuity, or like some exchange of sexual favors or something like that, right? But he really showed me what it was like to be an adult with adult relationships with other gay men, right? Like, you can love and care and nurture a relationship with another person, not based on anything outside of the fact that you truly enjoy and value that person as a human being. And I don't think I ever would have figured that out on my own without his help. So he's still my sponsor today, and I still love him to death. Yeah, I'm going to stop there, I think.
I wanted to share about a little more about like how gayness and alcohol, for me, they were not separate. Like, it was exactly the same. So the idea of separating them did not occur or make sense to me. They went together. And going out and being with my other queer, gay, lesbian friends and doing queer, gay, lesbian things was with alcohol, no matter what, in my life, in my experience. And it was also very, I want to talk a little bit about like the danger that and the unsafety that we were in and that we put ourselves in because we were going to the, we were doing these things that we thought we had to do and that felt fun for us. And I remember at that time, some of the gay clubs that I went to around here had like over 18 to 21 floors. And so you'd go into that floor, but the people from the 21 plus area could go to your floor. You just couldn't go to their floor. And they would come up. It was like a thing. They'd come up with shots of alcohol in their mouths and pretend to make out with you and put that shot of alcohol in your mouth. And it was a thing. It was like the way to get alcohol in your system. And I was thinking about that while you both were talking of, yeah, this was all fun and I could be gay and all, but like you're in these dangerous situations. And I think about sobriety now, and even like another thing that I looked forward to all the time when I was a young gay person was Pride festivals in Philadelphia. Outfest, Pride Fest, Equality Forum at that time were not spaces that I could go and not drink. I don't know that was everybody's experience, but definitely for me, I needed to be drunk in order to function in those spaces. And that's what was fun for me. And more recently, when I go to these events, there's recovery areas, there's sober areas, there's fun drinks that are not alcoholic. And I'm sure there was many sober people, people not drinking when I was younger too, but it wasn't focused on the way that it's focused on now. And that's so amazing to me. And then I wanted to talk about confidence. So like alcohol gave me confidence. It was my confidence. It gave me confidence with feeling like I had a good personality, feeling like I was funny, like people wanted to be around me. And it gave me confidence around people that I was interested in, or feeling like I could be liked by other people in a romantic or sexual way. And then that goes away because I got sober to save my life. That goes away out of absolute necessity. And all the confidence is gone, and I don't know how to be. I don't know how to be anything. So I go to these, even the idea, like I talked about how excited I was to go to this gay event when I was newly sober. I was excited, right? But like actually going and being around these people made me really, really nervous. And so my probably 5 or 6 years of my sobriety, I wasn't hanging around other gay people. That wasn't a huge part of my life and my identity. I would, I dated, but it just wasn't a big part of my life. And Michael, you talked about a dance. I remember my first sober dance, terrified. It was, I don't remember. It was like a St. Patrick's Day dance or something down here, downtown. And everybody was like, oh, it's going to be great. Sober dancing, sober fun. I was like this, like I was just standing by the wall, terrified, not knowing how to be and not understanding how these people can do this without alcohol in their systems. And that took me a long time. And so it didn't just happen that all of a sudden I got comfortable in sober spaces in general and sober spaces as a queer person. It took a lot of work to figure out how to be in my body and feel confident and comfortable without alcohol, feel confident and comfortable as a person, in a body and as a queer person and what that meant to be. So a lot of unraveling of internalized homophobia and a lot of healing and exploring and understanding of other mental health stuff that many of us experience. So it wasn't like here we are now, I can be queer and sober and have fun. So probably like the last 4 years, I've been able to get myself to go and be in queer spaces with other people drinking and feel confident. So I'll stop there, but I have some more for later.
I love this because you really are taking us into the next area that I definitely wanted us to travel in. So, and this might be like sort of like our sort of rounding out of today's discussion, which is to talk a bit about where we are now. Because then I would love to open it up for questions and comments. And so just hearing both of you speak about this, and Katie, just where you took us to in this moment, one of the things I think that is important for us to talk about, and especially not knowing who's joining us today. Some people may be here today because you are already a person in recovery. Maybe you're just curious about it. Maybe you're newly out in whatever way you identify, and you're wondering, how the heck do you negotiate all of this? And so I think for our sort of last part of our discussion is really talking about, who are each of us today in the ways that we identify and the ways that we are part of our queer communities, and maybe still what is challenging, but also just like even hearing you talk, Katie, a little bit about like this aspect of confidence and about like, who are we in the ways that we can show up. So I'll just jump us off here that, this year marks being sober for 33 years. And so I started, I got sober when I was 28, I'm 61. And, this has been one hell of a ride, and, some of my behavior along the way has not also matched and been aligned because there's ways that we can act out, for those of us that identify as people who had issues with addiction, in which we are not living and acting soberly. And so, I just want to clarify that, my first very serious partner, we met as sober people. We were together for 14 years. We had hopes of building a family that unfortunately did not happen. Other things got in the mix around parents and illness and things like that. But the introduction to sober queer life came with, and it was interesting because, both of you have spouses, and Michael, you were talking about that really hard question that was posed to you with your husband and the therapist at that time. But I will say this, that we can have a really vibrant life without a partner. I currently do not have a partner, but it really helped having somebody to travel with in a very intimate way, as the world of queerness opened up even more, and so I returned to a love of community, and did the very stereotypical thing of playing softball again. But the kind of cool thing was, it was a league in which you knew certain teams that were identified as sober teams where there was not going to be drinking afterwards. There was not going to be, doing drugs afterwards. And so all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I'm with a whole bunch of people. We're having a blast. And I don't have that pressure coming on. It's funny to start thinking about how the world is starting to change. So like, then Clinton's in office, and then there's more things that are opening up. And then, we're into the 2000s, and people are starting to do things like book clubs, and like, like you can go places. Coffee shops are opening up. I love a good coffee shop. You know what I mean? So I'm saying that kind of stuff because all of a sudden I'm not, and maybe it's as I'm aging, because that certainly factors in there. But as I'm in my late 30s, getting into my 40s, I'm watching sober spaces open up. And they're not necessarily recovery spaces, but they're spaces where the pressure of partying isn't coming with that space, but I'm getting to hang out with other queer people, and so that for me has been a godsend. And I feel like as I've come more and more into myself, the world has opened up in ways that I had never imagined. Some of it is just even around where we are around gender identity. And that's a whole new world that's opened up, and how people want to hang in spaces where we're doing all kinds of interesting things, but may not want the pressure of drugs involved, or the pressure of alcohol involved. And I think about, there's a big thing for a lot of us about creating the communities that we want and desire. And that's really at sort of like this stage in my life. I would say from like my partner and I ended when I was in my mid 40s, and I had to start, a lot of us have all talked about outside help. Outside help is a fantastic thing. I recommend therapy highly. And, part of understanding, going all the way back to where we started this conversation, what fueled my internalized homophobia, what fueled the secrecy, how am I in the world where it is so much safer in some ways. I'm trying not to think about the horrifying Speaker of the House that has just come into play, but like that, being in a city, being in an urban setting, we have all these opportunities and places where we can create queer community, where there is far less pressure for someone like me as I'm in the world more, and who I'm choosing to be. And so I operate from a lot of places of like moving with my own volition, having way more discernment, not succumbing to peer pressure, but just really being a present person in my body, and loving. I just only a few years ago started identifying as non-binary. I'm somebody that's had top surgery, like, it's like, hallelujah, I'm living my best life, and I'm like in a whole nother decade, and it's fucking awesome. So I'm going to shut up. I'm going to come back over to Katie here. And so jump us off. Where are you? And talk about some of these aspects.
Yeah, thank you, Carrie. I want to talk about how, when I was drinking was the centerpiece of my life. And so when I stopped drinking, I guess I thought for a long time that I needed to build new queer identity and community for myself that didn't involve alcohol at all. So being around other queer sober people and really kind of avoiding the part of queer community that included alcohol. It was important to me to date people who didn't drink and, just not really be around that. And that was safe for me for a long time. But there was definitely a piece missing of not feeling like I could be a part of all of my community. And so it's been really important for me in the last few years to realize that not everybody who engages in drinking alcohol drank like me or has an alcohol problem or it's not always going to be problematic. And that there are, situations and events and experiences where people are just rejoicing and enjoying life and alcohol is present. Of course, a lot of people struggle with alcohol, and that is not something that's gone away. But there's a balance, and I've been discovering that, and I've been allowing myself to, with a lot of mental health and alcohol recovery, behind me and a lot of support, allowing myself to re-engage in queer community nightlife, which I'd been so scared of for so long since I've become sober, and allowing myself in these spaces and having my own boundaries of, leaving when I don't feel right, making sure I go with people that I'm comfortable with, looking for events that have policies that make me feel comfortable and safe, in places that make me feel comfortable and safe. And there's a lot available that wasn't available when I was younger that I feel really grateful for. So a lot of the events that I do go to now, some of them are in nightlife spaces, but it's a very different experience than it used to be. And I think, that's what I have on that. Thanks.
So I think when it comes to regards to current identities and living in this space of sobriety and queerness, the first thing that I have to identify with is being a person in recovery. And with that, the many layers that it unfolds through step work, sponsorship, fellowship, all of these things. Carrie, you hinted at our wonderful 12-step practicing these principles in all our affairs. And sometimes we're not perfect at it, right? It happens that we still slip into old behaviors. With my recovery these days, it's probably not the best thing, but I try to stick to meetings that are almost exclusively LGBTQ plus. I got sober in a queer meeting. It's just where I feel the most comfortable. I go to a meeting on Monday nights that's not LGBTQ plus by any means, but like 60% of the people there are gay or queer. And so I'm like, these are my people, and I will openly state, like, if I go out of town and go to a meeting that is not, identified as queer, I don't always feel comfortable. And that's just something that I need to work through on my own. The other layer into my identity these days is being a parent. I'm a relatively new parent, and I again, back into the 12 step. If I'm not practicing these principles in all of my affairs, like, my poor child gets my ugly weird head at him, and here's my yelling and my disappointment. And it happens, right? You can only deal with so much 8-year-old chaos at one time. But I think everyone else too has also hit at the evolution of the space in which we exist as both queer people and sober people. And I think that the ability for us to see sobriety coming into the mainstream is really huge and really important, and has led to a lot of the catalytic movements that we've seen in general spaces like Pride and Outfest and other recovery or other sober opportunities. I was sitting here thinking, Drag Race fans in the audience. Yes. Okay. A few. Like RuPaul Charles is sober, Jujubee, Trixie Mattel is recently sober, right? Like, all of these people are coming out about their sobriety. And when the program of AA was written, I've said this in a room before, actually. I don't think Bill W. would have thought like, oh my God, like there's social media, there's drag queens who are now talking on their social media platforms about sobriety and recovery and things like that. Like that's something I think would blow his mind. But the ability for us to have such public figures talk about the importance of recovery spaces, especially queer people who are talking about this, after RuPaul's like era of the reign of the 90s, right? I think is huge. I think it has led to us having places like what was the place we were just talking, Painted Mug?
Oh, Benny, your place.
Yes.
The Painted
The
Mug.
Painted
Yes.
Mug, Unity Recovery having like sober restaurants and all these opportunities across the city. So I think it's wonderful to see. I love it. And they're not all necessarily intersectional with LGBTQ identities, but like just the ability for us to have more places in general to exist is great. So yeah.
First of all, I have to build on what you just talked about, Michael, and put a shameless little plug in for our collegiate recovery office here, because starting next week, certified peer specialists, folks that have a lived experience of recovery, are coming from Unity Recovery here to the Winnett building. And so you can join someone on Mondays from 12 to 1 for a lunchtime recovery. You'll see that up on the Pride portal and off in S111A. There's a QR code there, so you can get the information for if you want to join up on Zoom. And then on Tuesday evenings from 4 to 5, we will have a live meeting here in this building, right on this floor that we're in right now, in S208. And I will be there joining in on Tuesday evenings. So for anybody that's looking for a queer ally, hello, I'm here for you. If you're wanting to come, but also would like to take this opportunity to open it up. We have folks that have joined us here live in this room, and there might possibly be anybody that there are 4 people on the live stream. If anybody on the live stream wants to pose questions to our panel, we'll take those right now. And also, I want to thank Katie and Michael so much for joining us today and sharing so much of your journey and your stories. So if anybody would like to pose a question, I will actually come out to you with the microphone. Oh, Vinny's going to come to you. Here we go.
Hello. So this one's mostly for Carrie, but if either of you have a parallel, I'd love to hear about it. I'd like to ask you about how, I guess it would be in retrospect since you came into your non-binary identity after you were sober, but how did that did that click anything into place for you that you realized, oh, this was actually a big part of why I struggled so much when I was younger? And I guess for either of you, that could be the internalized homophobia that you mentioned earlier.
Hell yeah. That was such an excellent question. I have to say that Elliot Page's book told so much of my story that I couldn't even believe it. I cried a lot because there was no language for me. If I had the language of non-binary, that's where I would have arrived by junior high school. Let me just tell you that so many things have clicked into place that I feel like I'm sort of living a second coming out, and I'm glad that I'm sober doing that. But I love that question because there's so much about the intersection of queerness and gender identity. And for those of us that have struggled with substance use, that have to do with freedom. And that is a word that keeps coming up for me over and over again. And it is specifically connected to having a label that now speaks the highest truth of like how I feel, you know, even to the point of like, I feel it the way I'm carrying myself. And I've had people stop me. I've worked here at the college for 13 years, and I've had people come up to me in the hallway and go, something is different. You know, part of me wants to joke and go, yeah, I got no tits. But, you know, the other, but the other thing is and I don't answer that way, but I generally am like, yes, you are. I said, I am in my freest, best self. And I'm glad I'm able to do it sober. So I don't know if either of you want to speak to any aspect of that.
Carrie, it's almost like you have a weight off your chest.
Yeah. Vinny's been waiting to say that for quite a while. You always have that joke lined up. Anybody else? Questions or comments for anybody?
Just to say thank you so much for sharing all your stories with us. It's really beautiful to hear. So thank you.
Thank you for being here.
I actually have a question. So I am kind of part of a more recent cohort of harm reduction folks who became mostly sober or California sober or whatever, kind of like I occasionally will have a glass of wine or whatever, but I don't drink heavily anymore. And I've noticed this is like a really big trend. But now when I go out in the neighborhood, I run into people who I used to know, like from being out and about when I was drinking heavily. And it's like, I had such shallow relationships with these people. I don't even know how to engage with them anymore. And so I guess I have two questions. One would be, have you noticed an increase in sober folks in the community or an increase in like opportunities and people kind of like talking about it openly? And also, have you like, how do you navigate those like interactions with people who are from your former life who like, oh, hey, how good to see you, all this kind of stuff. And you have a very different kind of interaction than you're used to.
Go ahead.
I'm still thinking, so
Okay.
you should go.
Yeah. So, and something that I wanted to say about that earlier is up here, we've talked a lot about 12-step recovery and AA, and that is my experience. And I've ebbed and flowed with how I feel and how I exist in that recovery space. But it's worked for me, and it's something that, works for me now and that I'm grateful for. But I'm seeing so many more ways that people are getting sober, what sober looks like or means to people. And it's been so amazing to see the variety of that. And that, there is not only one way. And that can be really hard to access. And then when it comes to people that I used to interact with, I mean, honestly, when heavy drinking is not the main focus of your life, it leaves room and space for a lot of other stuff. And at first, that other stuff tends to be like hard and negative and requires healing and support. And then there's just a lot of space for really beautiful stuff and relationships. So when you come across people from a time in your life where you couldn't access like deep depth and deep conversations and honesty and connection, it's like, oh, what do I even, how do I do this? How do I get anything out of this? And I just find those relationships not to be relationships that I can really be in, and usually those people have no interest in being in a relationship with me. And so again, not to say that I can only have deep relationships with people who aren't drinking or even not drinking heavily, but it's something that in the 12-step literature, there's a very old term that is used, fair weather friends, just like friends that are not there when you really need them. And there's kind of a shallow surface thing. And when we're drinking, most of us can't really go more than shallow surface. So my friendships, the quality of my friendships have deepened so much. Where I'm willing to go has deepened. And what I was interested at one time in, I'm not interested anymore. And then the last thing I'll say about that is I remember people telling me when I was first getting sober and I was kind of hung up on people that I was just recently dating during my drinking or crushes or whatever. And people would say, you know, like what you were attracted to then is really going to change. And you're going to look back and be like, huh, what? Like how? And I find that to be true with people I was romantically interested in, friendships, types of jobs, types of hobbies. You change.
Yeah. And I love that response. And, you know, Vinny, what you made me think about with your question comes for me around, I've done a lot of reevaluating of relationships, work-wise, friendship-wise, romantically. I very similar to how Katie responded. I watched a lot of that change. I had a really core group of people that I hung out with in college. Everything for us was associated around the way that we partied. And I can, and this is a group of folks that are also queer. And we had a couple of get-togethers over the years of like these reunion kinds of get-togethers. I've stopped going to them because they haven't really shifted in what they do. And there's probably a few of them that probably could benefit from some sobriety. But I'm also, it was your use of the statement, the shallowness. I love depth now, you know, and I'm also very lighthearted. I can definitely go out and have a great time and really, you know, talk about just about anything. But there is a reevaluating process. And with that, I will tell you, Vinny, and everybody, there's also grief that comes with it. I went through some very, very deep mourning and deep grief as I've been through different sort of phases of my recovery or the way that I want to be in the world, even going from, you know, identifying as lesbian to queer to non-binary. I've lost some people along the way. And I think that is part of the process. No, Michael, if you want to say.
Y'all were both wonderful, so I'm not going to add anything. Although I think I see comments in the computer. So
we might have some live stream. Good eye there. Good side eye.
All right, we have no questions. Thank you so much to this fantastic panel, and thank you so much for sharing your stories.
Oh, thank you, live stream folks. That was awesome. Oh,
Kelly and Helen.
We got another raised hand, Vinny.
So I'm 28 now, so I feel like I've just come through like what would have been the heaviest pressure for all of this stuff. And like, I mean, it was mostly just time and place, not being in the wrong time at the wrong place for me, just not being a person who was already prone to that kind of thing. So I feel very lucky in that regard. But I also feel like, I mean, I inherently already see so much conversation about all of this, period, that it's already being acknowledged that, hey, this may or may not be a problem for people, so just keep an eye on that. So as people who are in recovery spaces and advocates for recovery, do you feel like there's sort of a gap in education for other substances? Because I feel like I see a lot happening with marijuana right now, where there's genuine benefits for using it regularly for certain people, but it's still something that could conceivably be abused. So do you feel like that's sort of more of a concern, or is it sort of just everything's the same on the same level, like alcohol, everything else, you know, could be, yeah, a drug is a drug, everything's just as potentially dangerous?
That's a deep question.
It's a fantastic question. I mean, I could share with you that I have people in my life that have sought out some of the benefits of like medical marijuana, and these are folks that would not have normally maybe gone that route, and so I get to hear some of the positive side of things. I also in my own circles have had way more discussions, and I'm somebody that 12-step meetings have been very, very beneficial for me, and my lens has opened up tremendously to the benefits of harm reduction. And that has a lot to do with students I've had here, and students I've had who have had debilitating anxiety or ADHD or many other kinds of things in which, and who are queer and who have grappled around, you know, uh, religion and gendered language that can be associated with 12-step recovery. But coming back to some of the nature of your question, I have definitely seen people throughout my time being a sober and clean person who thought that they were sort of free and clear with certain substances, and it grabbed a hold of them in ways that the original substance did. And so I would say that, for a lot of us, it's so chemical. It has so much to do with how we're wired. And it also has to do with like, where are you at in your life around stressors and the management of like just life stuff and coping skills. And so, I feel like any substance has the potential to get unmanageable for people, if there isn't some kind of solidity about like and clearness about like, how do I use this? Do things feel manageable? And it can really go south. And I'm hearing more and more people. I've gone through certain phases. I lost a very, very close friend of mine, who ended up taking their life, but who grappled with meth, was under control around alcohol for a while, thought that, and that's, still huge pressure in gay male community in particular. But so like, there's been these waves of certain substances and in our queer community that have really gotten very, very popular, whether it's around, sexual enhancement or, certain scenes and certain settings about like, yeah, we do this and it makes it, a more enlivened experience. But if somebody's already sort of prone or wired in that way, anything can be potentially harmful. I don't know if either of you want to comment on that.
As a joke on this, you should see the gay sober Facebook groups about poppers. Those debates get intense. I take controlled substances to sleep. I can't do it on my own. And I take it under the direction of a doctor. My husband helps me with it. Like if there are moments where I'm like, I probably shouldn't have these pills in my possession right now, you should take them. He does, to Carrie's point, I think any substance, depending on your chemical nature and what's happening in your life at the time, can be something that can be abused and may eventually be maybe fine now, but may eventually get out of control. And I think that is something that, if you have the right supports within your own personal network, medical care, and have, we talked about the benefits of therapy and outside help earlier, like all of these things combined, I think is a different conversation than just like taking a substance recreationally on your own.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's not clear cut. And I believe that different people are different. Everybody's different depending on so many things and where they are in their life and their recovery and how much support they have. And when it comes to other substances, for whatever reason that I might need or be considering them at any given moment, I always have to really be honest with myself about why I want that, why I feel like I need that, make sure that I have support around me and I'm being honest, because a lot of my, drinking behaviors as we discussed a lot today, was all around like sneakiness and secrecy. And I could go into that really quickly. I can go into that with like Tylenol, sometimes just like a mental thing of like, well, I'm just going to take 3, even though I probably only need 1. And that's okay if I do that in that moment, but I have to be really aware of like, oh, there's that thought process and where I go with more and more and more. So I think just honesty with self and others and communication and support, but there's no clear-cut answer for everyone. It's a personal experience.
I also just want to add, like, no one really believes that a drug is a drug is a drug. Even in 12-step programs where it is very more like cut and dry, caffeine is allowed. Nicotine is allowed. And so it's like there are drugs that are more intense than others. There are drugs that are more dangerous than others. There are drugs that are more intense than others. And like, it's like you said, it's about your relationship with those drugs and how they affect you personally. There's a lot of people who say like you can't overdose on marijuana, but if you have schizophrenia, it can basically send you into psychosis. So it's literally different for everyone. The risk profile is different for everyone. And it's about managing your own risk profile and also recognizing your own triggers, because not only is addiction a mental health issue, it is often triggered by other mental health issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Vinny. Oh, we got some of the, yeah, perfect timing. Yeah, let's hear from you.
Hello, everyone. It was very nice to hear everyone speak and share your stories. That is very brave of you. You know, I appreciate hearing everything that you have to say. Personally, for me, I have really extreme social anxiety. So I would say alcohol is like it helps you. It gives you confidence when you're in a social setting to express yourself. And without it, what would you say are tips or confidence builders that you have as a practice since you've been sober or going into becoming sober? Like, how did you make that transition from being, dependent on that in a social setting to being confident in who you are and still being able to socialize comfortably and freely?
That is a wonderful question. Do you want to start us off, Katie? Go ahead.
Sure. I mean, it's a wonderful question. And again, I think everybody's experience is different because it depends on your personality and, but it takes time. It takes time and healing and understanding yourself and like trying things. A lot of the beginning of my sobriety, like probably the first couple years, super uncomfortable. Just any social situation was super uncomfortable. And I absolutely had moments and periods of time of like, well, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to go out. I'm going to stay in. And there was a lot of isolation. There was increased depression because of that. And just continuing to try and ask for help and try to be with other people like me and finding like what I actually like, and what you like might not be the most social thing. But yeah, time and support.
Yeah, I like that. I was going to say we need some co-pilots, right? So bring a wing person with you, but because that for me over time allowed me to take more risks. Was like just having 1 or 2 people that I could really trust, and they were sort of like my, they were my anchors. They were people I could lean into, and then it really does start to, outside help really helped. Like, just the part about what Katie talked about time is you will be kind of blown away as you grow and mature and come into yourself. Like there is so much that changes as we kind of walk through the aging process. And I don't mean like aging. I mean, just even like you'd be amazed where you are, 2 years from now. But just the fact that it's in your awareness already, that's a start. That's already planting a seed for like an intention where you want to be.
I'm gonna start by saying that I am still not in a place of being confident. Like in my sexuality and who I am as a person, yes, but like social anxiety, I have quarterly check-ins with a psychiatrist for my medication, and one of the questions is, "What's your anxiety level on a scale of 1 to 10?" And it's always a 6 or a 7. And then when he asks like why, I'm like, because I hate social situations. Hate it. I made an awkward comment to my boss this past Monday that I'm still thinking about in my head. Like, why did I say that? You know? Um, and I think for me, what I do to be intentional about like social situations um, is I almost always practice or write down everything I'm going to say before I have to say it. If it's like a big presentation, I note that like for me, the more I read scripted things, the worse I am at public speaking, because if I miss a word, I fumble for the rest of it. So I kind of give myself like general outlines of like things to talk about, and then like maybe some sub bullets, right? To like make sure I don't forget. But like everything I do has to be very planned. Um, and I know this is kind of like negating what was just previously said, but like there's a situation, there is like I'm 5.5-ish years sober, and like there's a real reality that like it is something that you just live with and you learn to adapt to, right? And it's okay, right? Because there's dozens, if not hundreds, of people on this campus alone who have that exact same experience, and want to be as socially out there as like Carrie is, right? But it's to your own, like whatever, you will figure out a system that works for you. And like if it's jotting things down, if it's planning conversations in your head, if it's therapy that like is really intense and is focused on this, then it works, right? But for me, it's like a toolbox of things that I use and pull out all the time to try and resource myself. So
Awesome.
I want to add to this question too. So I like, as someone with anxiety and who is neurodivergent, alcohol was a lot of like, I need this to get through the social interaction. I need to get through this. But like if I cannot deal with the loud noise and the flashing lights and the large crowd of people, I'm not actually making myself less anxious about it. I'm either like postponing the reaction until tomorrow, or I'm like dulling the senses, or I'm basically ignoring my own boundaries. Like if I am uncomfortable in a space and I'm drinking to stay in that space rather than removing myself from that space, maybe the better thing is to be like, you know what, this is too overstimulated, this is too crowded. I need to go to a more low-key environment. And so like, I always say that when you're drinking, you're borrowing tomorrow's dopamine, because you will feel great and your anxiety will be subsided. But the next morning, even if you don't have a hangover, you might be replaying every single interaction you had the night before with an added layer of guilt and shame because you can't fully remember what was happening. And so I call that an emotional hangover, because the next day you're just like, so like to this day, like if I have 3 drinks, I will still have that emotional hangover, even if I have no other hangover symptoms. And it's like, why do I want to be at a deficit of dopamine all day when I already have a condition that limits my dopamine? So it's like alcohol is not meant to treat anxiety. There are actual pills that are made for that. So like if you want to treat your anxiety, it might be good to go to a psychiatrist and ask for non-habit forming, like recreationally used drugs. Like there are things that like do not affect you, like do not make you high or whatever, but can ease your anxiety levels. So there's a lot of different things you could do, but like using recreational drugs off label to treat mental health issues is usually not a great idea, because eventually it will stop being effective, especially because alcohol is a depressant. At the end of the day, like it makes you feel happy in the moment, but the lasting effects are negative.
Thank you, everybody. I know we've hit our time point. This was lovely. That was lovely. Thank you so much. And Vinny, thank you for just the partnership that we're getting to have between our intersecting centers here at the college. And thanks everybody on the live stream. Oh, and there's goodies over there for people that are here. There's brownies and soft pretzels and water. So please, please
And
don't
if
be shy.
anyone watching live online or in this audience would like to come see either Carrie or myself, we do share an office in S111A on the first floor of this building at the end of the ramp. So come visit us. And if you're watching this after the live has ended, still come visit us.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to end the stream. So thank you all for joining us.